You're listening to the Feed Your Wild podcast, a conscious lifestyle show about all things nourishing for your body, mind, and soul. I'm Vanessa Rodriguez, and join me for candid conversations with changemakers, exploring health and wellness, food as medicine, intuition and spirituality, and nature-based practices that will transform your health and feed all parts of your wild self. Hello. Welcome back to Feed Your Wild. I'm your host, Vanessa Rodriguez, your intuitive nourishment guide today and every episode. Oh, I am feeling the energy of the culmination of this year of 2022. It's coming to an end, and honestly, it feels really good, right? I think the last few years, so many of us have felt a sense of hope. Maybe we have felt a little bit of wishful thinking for the next year. But what I'm feeling at this time is a collective wave-like energy of ending big patterns that are not serving us. I am seeing this in clients, in the students in my practitioner mastermind program, the Wildly Intuitive Practitioner Pathway. This is a theme that's been coming up time and time again. I am seeing this in parts of my own life, even if it hasn't been fully expressed and things haven't completely changed. It's almost like the underground workings, the layers, the deep layers of the soil and the compost is beginning to awaken and stir and change things at that level beyond our ability to see. Much like the mycelial networks that are communicating and connecting with one another, with the other plantkin, tree roots. There's so much happening underground. And that's just on the living plane that we have an understanding of and that we can test, and actually record. This is not even considering the spiritual and the subtle shifts and changes that are happening deep in the layers of our own being. But this is what I'm tapping into. I'm feeling this not just as a personal, individualized experience, but I'm really feeling this as a collective experience. And perhaps you are too. I am seeing this being expressed physically for a lot of people as what can look like imbalance, what can look like getting sick over and over. And I don't think it's just attributable to the change in seasons, in so-called flu season. I think that there's a lot of, whether you want to call them so-called ascension symptoms of expansion, I'm feeling like this is really about a lot of the muck and the things that are calling our attention, our intelligence-wise body that is signaling to us what is ready to be released. And the process of releasing may not always look pretty and may not always feel so great. And so I want to encourage those that maybe are in a state, especially physically and emotionally, of contraction. You're feeling, what the F? Here I am sick again, or I have this headache that won't go away, or my digestion is just, I thought that I had this on lockdown. I had thought that I had addressed this, but here we are again. And I want you to lean into it with a lot of compassion and ask your body what might be the deeper message here. What might be the wider landscape of what's happening? And how is it tethered to your evolution? and your future. Of course, this can be applied to, as I mentioned, the emotional and mental contractions we might be experiencing and the spiralic nature of our thoughts and negativity and the patterns. And that's what I'm going to be talking about a lot today. There has been a lot going on in the cosmos, energetically, and if you watch and pay attention to the news, which in all honesty, I don't really, because that is one way that I honor my own nervous system. But if you do, there clearly is a lot of disharmony, incoherence in messaging. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming for any human to receive and experience as a kind of truth, being fed information, a lot of information and stimulus that is totally disruptive to all levels of your being, of your body, and absolutely has an impact and effect on your day-to-day set point. Inside of my program, there has been a lot of conversation around what is beginning to surface, and a lot of the contractions and self-imposed limitations that we experience as healers. Essentially, what holds us back as healers. So I want to speak into some of the biggest patterns and themes and things that I see holding healers back from doing their work fully in full alignment and authenticity and the fullest of their expression, and doing so in a way that actually feels good. I am drawing this from observation as a practitioner who's worked with hundreds of people who, whether they self-identify as healers or not, I consider them healers in this world, as advocates, as those with big hearts who are here in service to their family and their communities and others in general. And also the active conversations and the things that I'm seeing inside of my programs that are really focused on supporting healers. I'm also getting this information from you, from those of you who are writing to me directly, sharing what is coming up for you, what is resonating, and what you're struggling with. And of course, tapping into the Akashic Records on the collective experience of this and bringing in a bit of insight from those realms. Before I move into that, this is the final call for applications for the Wildly Intuitive Practitioner Pathway. This is my 6-month group mentorship and practitioner mastermind for healers and helpers who are ready to step out of the so-called spiritual closet, expand their intuitive gifts, and go from struggling empath or conventional practitioner to what I call New Earth Intuitive Healer. We have our winter solstice slow medicine ceremony with Megan Lehman coming up on the solstice, December 21st. We also have a super exciting workshop with Natalie Ross from EarthSpeak, all on trauma-informed marketing for healers. And that is the first week of January. If you want to get in on these events live, these are exclusive masterclasses for participants of the Wildly Intuitive Practitioner Pathway. So you gotta apply to see if it's a good fit. So I welcome you to apply. This is the last week that you'll be able to get in this year, 2022, and as a holiday end-of-year gift for you. If you choose to apply, are accepted, and say yes and step into this container, we won't set your official start date until January 2nd, but you'll get immediate access to everything, which means you're getting weeks worth of access, complimentary as a gift. So if you've been thinking about it, if it's been on your radar, if you're curious, I say go for it. There's nothing to lose by applying, and we can then see if it's a good fit and explore if the wildly intuitive practitioner pathway is the best next step for you. This is the time to step in. So the invitation is open. If you apply and get accepted, you'll receive an invitation to my free private training on how to create a transformative intuitive healing practice you love, plus a recording of a recent Akashic Q&A live with a few folks that came on and were brave enough to have an impromptu Akashic reading from yours truly. I answered a bunch of questions about the program and about intuitive healing, but these readings were so powerful, and it gives you a glimpse into what it might be like for you hopping onto our bi-weekly Akashic Q&A group calls, which are always so fruitful and illuminating. If you're feeling the nudge to move into 2023 in community with like-hearted folks that support your process, your messiness, your brilliance and gifts, and your expansion, then I really encourage you to apply and join us. You can click the link in the bio or go to wildlyrooted.com/apply, and I cannot wait to connect with you. Let's get into this topic of the top things that I see holding healers back. Now, I first have to say that my vantage point and orientation is coming from a person who went from the so-called conventional clinical world, stepping through my spiritual awakening process, forever continuing doing that, right? And then moving into what I call intuitive healership and fully embracing that and exploring all of my own gifts. And one of the tools and the practices that I utilize is the Akashic Records. If you are not familiar with the Akashic Records, if this is your first time here, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I have an episode all about the Akashic Records. It's called Akashic Records 101, and I will link that in the show notes below. But essentially, I talk about my process of how I discovered, or the Akashic Records found me, and my journey into working with them and how I utilize them. And of course, insights on what are the Akashic Records and how to access them. One of the things that I have experienced in working with the Akashic Records, and I experienced this profoundly on an individual level, so on a personal level, but I also saw this in a much richer way working with others and bringing the Akashic Records into a healing setting for others, is the power of the Akashic Records for healing through insight and awareness. Now, the Akashic Records can assist you in awakening yourself up to dysfunctional patterns, but also working through them and bringing resolution to these patterns that are not serving you, not only from this lifetime, but from other incarnations, whether that's lifetimes or even dimensions. When we connect with the Akashic Records, let me just talk about the energetics around the Akashic Records for just a moment to really set an understanding of how we can connect with this information at this level. So the Akashic Records are encoded and held, you could say, suspended in the universal energy field, the unified field that surrounds us and interpenetrates all of us. So it's not something that is outside of us, and it's living and it's co-creating with us. It's being written. The records are being written as we live our lives. There is the spiritual reality that is the foundation of all of life. It is the root of the physical, the so-called physical reality that you can see and take in with your physical eyes. But the physical reality is a kind of illusion. Now, we don't need to argue about this. It is known that we are made of particles, literally light in motion, creating vibrational frequencies that create the illusion of physicality, of matter. But this is the point. We are meant to experience this illusion and all of its beauty and wonder for understanding ourselves, one another, our interrelatedness, and for our growth, our soul's growth. We are creating and living in a kind of collective hologram. And I think that this can be, aside from being mind-blowing, if this is the first time you're hearing this, but this is also highly empowering because there can be the issue of over-identifying with your role that you have been assigned to or that you have assigned yourself in this physical reality. When we over-identify or attach ourselves so much to a particular role or a projection of what we think we are or should be or could be, this is when we can begin to do things like blame. Blame yourself or blame others for your experiences. Playing victimhood through your unconscious volition. Now, this is not to say that there are not real contexts and situations of inequality, of violence, of disparity, and so many of the atrocities that we have witnessed historically and currently, and that you yourself may have experienced. What I'm talking about are the choices that we get to make as individuals, that we are empowered to make in our own lives, and that, yes, so often I see people choosing victimhood. I am not an exception to this. When I have over-identified with a particular role or sense of self, or even a situation that I wanted so badly, I'm in a state of forgetting about my true nature, who I really am, and forgetting about the spiritual reality and connections beyond these physical limitations and illusions. In this way, I forget my own sovereignty, my strength and capacity, my power. So what I love about working with the Akashic Records is that it requires you to step into a place of non-attachment, letting go of these notions of victimhood or blame or guilt or doubt or even lack, especially when it comes to self-worth. Because to plug into the records requires you to have your ego be put aside and connecting fully with your heart and attuning to the frequency of the higher realms, attuning to your higher self, and allowing insights, intuitive messages, and truths to flow through, requiring you to see through different eyes from a different vantage point, where you can perceive the spiritual underpinnings of any circumstance, of any situation or relationship you have experienced. Now, I do want to say that working with the Akashic Records is never about diminishing or minimizing your current circumstances and situations or your pain. but it is about meeting them directly with support in an empowered way and with love to uncover what is behind that, what is behind the fabric of the tapestry that has been woven in front of you, and supports you in finding a way to create a breakthrough. When I ask healers, what is it that holds you back? The top two things that I'm told are fear and lack of clarity. Now, these are two very valid things. You might be experiencing this yourself. And I have to say that fear and lack of clarity are not the root issues behind what is holding you back. These are symptoms. Well, what are they symptoms of? You could say in a general sense, they're symptoms of misalignment. And I want to reframe this for you a little bit and bring in the idea that maybe fear and lack of clarity are not so bad after all. Maybe this tension between the haves and the have-nots can actually be a good thing. This tension can inform you of what is off, what is not right, what is not you, what you desire. And that this tension can light a fire to your co-creative capacity to manifest what it is that you truly desire and is in alignment into your reality. But yeah, Vanessa, that's all well and good. But how do I move through that? How do I begin to co-create the reality that is actually aligned for me? How do I step into a path of healership in a way that is empowering? There's a lot to say about that. And I want to first start off by sharing what I said that I was going to share, which is the top things that I see holding healers back. Now, this is aside and beyond the fear and lack of clarity. So these are kind of general blocks that a lot of people can experience, but again, they're symptoms and there's a lot going on behind the scenes, so to speak. So first, there are the unconscious patterns. Now, there's different levels of consciousness, as you know. There is our waking consciousness, and there is the unconscious. The unconscious, we can put subconscious under here. We could put the unconscious collective unconsciousness here as well. This is the soil. These are where your roots are, the unseen realms where literally everything is grown from. So everything that you yourself have co-created, have manifested, has in some way come from the unconscious realms. Within the unconscious, there are patterns that we hold, templates, so to speak. And these can produce and hold beliefs and thoughts which inform our perceptions and our actions. What I have seen is that there can be things within the unconscious that are held in the morphogenic field. So the morphogenic field is sort of like the ecosystem that you're moving through, connected to various groupings. So this can be your species. So as humans, perhaps the morphogenic field of your family lineage. So this could be your family constellation. It can also be the morphogenic field of the region that you reside in. So there are patterns that are held, information that's held in these fields. There's also information and patterns that are inherited and held in our blood, our bloodline, our lineage, our genes, our genetic expression, and through ancestry. We can also receive these patterns through development and birth, in utero, as fetuses, women, and you could say imprinted also before becoming a fetus, as an egg in your grandmother's or the sperm from your biological father. What were those environments like? We, of course, also see these unconscious patterns being developed or imprinted in childhood, especially the years 0 to 7, because this is the state where we're actively in a more theta state, brainwave frequency. So we're in open and receiving mode. We're literally in a developmental stage that is all about absorption, sponge, programming. This is why so often we see childhood traumas and inner child work being incredibly informative as it relates to the expressed patterns and challenges and problems that we see in our lives as adults. One very real and researched example of this is ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. There are many studies with that. You can go down the rabbit hole with that research, but essentially it highlights how traumas, now there's no big T, little t here, it's really experienced trauma from the perspective of a child in childhood has an impact on your future health. And when we see your ACE score, so the more childhood traumatic experiences that you have, or adverse childhood experiences that you have, the higher the likelihood of having multiple health challenges and chronic health challenges. So connections to autoimmune disorders, mood disorders, degenerative diseases, inflammatory diseases, and all of that. So trauma itself and perceived trauma creates an imprint in our unconscious patterns. And we might be conscious of it, but it also operates in our unconscious patterning, which creates a program that we run on. Now, there are also spiritual influences that imprint our unconscious patterns. So this includes entities, spirits, demons, you could say parasitic type of pathological spiritual entities. I also like to call them commensal. So there can be commensal entities. And this is a way for me to say that, kind of drawing a parallel to the microbiome. We have our commensal microorganisms and commensal bacteria. So these are things that are natural, are in existence, that we coexist with them, and there's no morality attached to it. They're neither good or bad, but they can have an influence on us. They can perhaps be overgrown, or we don't have enough of them. So I feel like this spiritual reality is very much like that. We are spiritual beings living in a material experience. And so we have the ecology, the spiritual ecology with our commensal spiritual beings that are in the unseen realms, that are always having some sort of influence and interrelating process with us. And so that is also going to inform, at some level, various patterns and things that are happening in the unconscious. So influences of thoughts, especially, and beliefs that we are fed, various voices, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, as I'd mentioned with the ecology, there's the environment. There's the literal energetics of the environment, of the place where you are, where you work, where you live, where you sleep. And those energetics can have an influence on your unconscious self, your patterns, your thoughts, your emotions, and your own energy. This is the premise behind feng shui, right? If you're familiar with feng shui, I have a beautiful podcast episode with an expert that I'll make sure to link up in the show notes. But this is an ancient practice and understanding of energetics, of how when you make shifts in your environment and you bring in various ways of clearing, cleansing, and organizing, so organization, you literally change the frequency and energetics of emission of existence that are influencing your life and what becomes manifest, because it has a direct impact on your unconscious. So I know that's maybe a lot to process. There's a lot there. I think that's just the point. There is a lot there. And this is just looking at the unconscious patterns and programs that we might be running on. Then we have past lives, our past lives, or you could say various incarnations, because once you get into the spiritual realms, we're moving beyond space-time, we're moving beyond the linear, and we're in all time. So we can see from our lens here on so-called Earth and the material realm that it may be a past life or future life. But when you go into spiritual understanding, there isn't that linear process. So there can be influences and what I call residue from these various incarnations that express themselves in our life. So this can be lessons that we chose to learn here. There can be contracts that were set into place, that at a soul level, you created a contract with another soul, with yourself. You can have a current contract with a partner, for example, to always stay in victim mode and to be saved. And so you might see these play out, and they might not have any direct connection to any experience that you've had in childhood, any trauma. And that's because these can be connected to past life traumas. One really big one connected to so many of the healers that I see are witch wounds, what we could call a witch wound. Now, the witch wound is essentially the idea that we have in our field, in our bodies, we have the memory of being hunted, being violated, being murdered, having these horrific experiences of oppression, violence, suppression, etc., because of our gifts, because of expressed healership in whatever way that might have looked. So I have seen in a lot of readings with folks past lives of healership, whether it was an herbalist or someone who was a curandera, who connected with the spiritual realms in past lives, someone who had past lives of shamanic origins, and connections to the historical period of the actual witch hunts that were recorded, in which thousands of people, mostly women, were murdered or harmed in some way because of their witchcraft, the work that they did that was deemed the work of the witch and evil. Now, there are many, many experiences of this in various lives and lifetimes, and there often is this residue, this memory that is held in the through line of the lives with the soul as the soul journeys. And there is this sense of danger, this lack of safety, this very root chakra kind of fear that comes up that is very real, that I see expressed in so many different ways in healers that are holding themselves back in some way from fully coming out and fully exploring and expressing their gifts. Now, we see modern witch hunts, we could say that online there's various kinds of witch hunts, but compared to previous historical contexts, we are now living in an age where most of us, now I'm not making the generalization that all of us, obviously we see in many parts of the world where there's still a lot of suppression, oppression, and violence, but in a more collective experience of today's world, there is not the same kind of imminent danger that there was to our lives that there was during those times where people were literally murdered for practicing their healership. And so we have to come to terms with that. We have to connect with those lives and process the trauma and come to a level of safety within ourselves. So cultivating a sense of safety within ourselves first, primarily, in order to begin to be comfortable in moving forward and sharing our voice, expressing our gifts, and actively pursuing our healership in ways that maybe previously we would fear being seen or having judgment around it. And it doesn't have to do with just the witch wound, so to speak. There can be the past life traumas of simply expression of the self and stepping out as your authentic self. One example of this is I remember giving a reading to a woman who said that she had a lot of fear around this one particular part of her life and, kind of really stepping forward and coming out. And what came through in the reading was that she had this gift of voice, and she was meant to explore that. There was singing involved, and that I was shown a past life where she was an incredible singer artist. And this was at a time and in a context where, by the nature of who she was not only held back and suppressed, but eventually killed because of her gifts and her audacity, we could say, of being herself. And when I shared this, and there's a lot more specifics to that, when I shared this with the woman, she expressed so much relief because she had had a dream of this same scene, the same context. And she had felt in her core that this was true, that it made the dream make so much sense, the connections to her current paralyzation and challenges that she couldn't move through. And the simple acknowledgement that, number one, she was not crazy. Number two, that there was validity, and not only validity, there was actually an awareness of what the roots, one of the roots of this issue that she was dealing with was. There was a healing in process with this. And, when we're working within the Akashic Records, as an aside, it's a very healing energy. You're held in the field of the records, and it's held in a field of love and a much higher vibration. So there's healing happening simply by being in the energy of the Akashic Records. But in the processing and integration of this information and really accepting and feeling this in her beingness, there was a healing and a release that occurred that allowed her to begin to explore the realms of utilizing and sharing her voice, expressing it in a more empowering way, in a curious way, and ultimately in a delightful way, because there wasn't the scariness of the unknown and that residue from this previous trauma. Now, it didn't mean that was resolved, right? It wasn't like she went back in time and was able to save herself. But it was by coming to terms with it and remembering those aspects of herself, who she was, and that in this time and space, she had the invitation and the ability and the pathway to step out in a way that she was not able to before. So this is the power of shining a light on a lot of these unconscious patterns, past life traumas and contracts, and the inner workings and spiritual workings of what is behind a lot of the challenges and a lot of the blocks. I'm going to name some specific examples of blocks that I see with a lot of healers that have come up lately, and I just want you to open yourself up and see if any of these hit a chord, if they strike a chord for you. If they do, and you will feel it intuitively, whether that's in your body or you'll have an intuitive knowing, whatever way that you intuitively receive and process, I want you to allow this to inform and to highlight where there might be a block or some sort of programming that you can bring more awareness to and shine a light even brighter upon it. So when it comes to beliefs, there's a lot of beliefs in the unconscious that are around worth, self-worth, that you're not good enough, you're not intuitive enough, you're not smart enough, you're not good-looking enough, you're not charismatic enough, you're not good enough with words, like whatever the not good enoughness is about, that is a huge part of what can hold you back. There's so often this belief that you may not have what it takes to access divine guidance, that you don't have the intuition, the intuitive connection, or that others can do it because they're somehow special, but you can't. That's another one that I see very often, and that is just absolutely not true. Another is that you just don't have spiritual gifts. You haven't experienced them, so you must not have them. That is also not true. I've seen this many, many times, and it just requires a little bit more compassion and patience and curiosity in the self-exploration process and unearthing your own gifts. So starting to look at what the blocks are that, in all honesty, usually are keeping you safe. You know, a lot of the blocks are here because they're protective. So it's really important that we bring a lot of compassion to that. There could be unconscious agreements and contracts. So like a current life unconscious agreement to play small, to never surpass your sister, your cousin, your partner, your mother, XYZ. There can be a past life contract to never do spiritual work again or to never use your spiritual gifts. Now, this would fall under the umbrella of the witch wound, right? So this often is connected to some traumatic past life experience or experiences. I usually see multiple past lifetimes of this, of being punished or violently suppressed for your role as a healer, as a clairvoyant, as a mystic, as a seer, etc., etc. There, in this way, is a connection to trauma, whether it's current life or past life, that is keeping your nervous system stuck in survival mode, in protection mode, limiting your ability to not only connect with your spiritual self, with your intuition, and with the spiritual world, but to also manifest in a conscious, co-creative, empowering way. Now, that can look many different ways in one's life, but the way that I see the nervous system is a bridge. The nervous system is a bridge between our material embodiment and expression and experience and our ability to perceive and our spiritual reality, our spiritual self, our energetics, and the way that we move through this world and in co-creative capacity with the world on a spiritual level. So the nervous system is so key because it's linked with our unconscious self. And if you don't have ways to support your nervous system, then it's going to be really challenging to move through blocks that you have in your unconscious or in the spiritual realms or in your conscious waking life. We have also the individual experience, so our individuated experience of our life and ourself. And we have collective experience that very often we are unconsciously experiencing. And I think this is really important to bring up because as healers, I would say that 100% of us and you are sensitive. We are able to perceive and receive information, whether you are aware of it or not. And so the collective experience, the collective waves, so to speak, of the vibrational frequencies, the emotions, the thoughts, the collective hive mind activity is going to impact you. You're going to feel it, experience it, probably on that unconscious level. And I think we saw this very much so during COVID, especially in the beginning. And I want you to bring a lot of compassion again to yourself and to others in this collective experiencing. But it's also important to establish awareness and discernment around what is yours in your individual and personal experience and what is not yours. So it's critical that you cultivate that discernment. And, that takes practice. There's a lot of ways that you can begin to do that. We can maybe cover that in another podcast episode, but I had to bring that into this mix because I think a lot of people think that's all about them. There's something wrong with them. And very often I see that people are literally riding the emotional waves of the collective. And of course, then there is divine timing. This is one that a lot of people don't want to entertain because, they might want something so badly for so long. But sometimes there is just divine timing. There is an intelligence to the timing of the experience here in this perceived linear time realm. And there are certain things that need to be in place for the highest expression for whatever it is that you want to call in or experience. So there is that. And how do you know whether it's an experience where it's just about divine timing or you have blocks? I think this is where, staying in curiosity, compassionate curiosity about yourself and talking to all of your bodies, talking to your energy body, talking to your soul, your spirit, talking to your physical body, and having those conversations of, hey, what's going on here? What do I need to look at? Where are the places that I need to lean into? And working with your guides and God in this co-creative, this collaborative experience that is your life. And sometimes you won't know. You just won't have the answer. And that's okay too. Because sometimes it's about the feeling it and the experiencing of it and not the knowing of the what or the how or even the why. So I have some questions that I want you to ask yourself when you find that you're maybe in a contraction or you feel like you have some blocks or programmings and you can't quite move forward. Maybe you've even identified, like if I've listed a few of these items and you're like, oh my gosh, that sounds like me, or my body's lighting up, or I feel it in my gut, or I intuitively am sensing this is my experience or what's happening for me. I want you to ask yourself these questions. What am I not allowing myself to desire? What am I not allowing myself to desire? So where am I holding the most judgments and projections and guilt? Which voices, thoughts, beliefs are actually mine and co-created by me, and which are not me, which are fed to me or are on autopilot? Because again, we can receive these in many different ways, and all the ways that I've listed. We can inherit them, we can be in their field, and we can also have various interjections and insertions of thoughts from others, whether they're other humans or more than human entities and beings. You can also ask yourself, what are the lessons you are learning in this state that you're in? What are the lessons that are available to you right now with nothing changing? What are the roles that you play and those around you that signify something or teach you something? So what are the roles that you're playing, teaching you and signifying to you? And what are the roles that others are playing, teaching you and signifying to you? How are these blocks holding you back? How are these thoughts holding you back? How are these beliefs holding you back? How are these same blocks, thoughts, beliefs, etc., keeping you safe? How are they keeping you safe? What do you lose by staying where you are right now? What do you lose? What do you gain? What do you get to keep or gain by staying where you are right now? In whatever context we're in, there is always somewhere in there a positive intention for staying in that state or context. Whether we want to agree to that or not, or believe in that or not, I want you to stay in compassionate curiosity and ask yourself, what do you both lose by staying where you're at, and what do you gain or get to keep by staying there? We often feel as though we don't get to choose, that we don't have a choice. But in fact, there's always, always, always the availability of choice. The choice in how we get to feel, to think in every moment. In some cases of trauma, there is deeper work that needs to be done to support your body and your nervous system, as I talked about earlier, your nervous system's capacity to even engage with the different options and feel safe enough in doing so. And this is why things like somatic work, incredibly important. Nervous system work, all sorts of nervous system work, so critical. Especially when in a process of spiritual awakening and stepping onto your path of healership. You have to have support for your body, for your nervous system, and this very deep work. So, where do you begin with all of this? Well, I would recommend everybody start to bring in nourishment and support for your nervous system. That's kind of a given in today's world, I think. Everybody needs support with that. And there's a lot of different ways. And, throughout the various episodes, we're always dropping different ways of doing that, whether it's through food, herbs, practices, support from others, types of practitioners, and healing work. The point is, bring something in. Start somewhere, even if it's just your breath, anchoring into your breath, which isn't just because it's probably one of the most critical things that we can do to support our nervous system. So tune into that, connect with your breath in whatever way that feels comfortable for you, and start to explore. The second piece would be to lean into learning more about yourself. So whether that's through your design and unearthing your gifts, I'm a fan of deep self-exploration and utilizing tools such as astrology and human design. I think they are phenomenal for helping one to not only understand yourself and the way that your proclivities, your various gifts and potential imbalances, where you're going, where you have been, sort of like an instruction manual for your energy being and your body, but also for affirming what you already know. Because of course you don't need those tools or systems of understanding, those design systems, but they are available to you to help sort of as like a map. And what I have found is that they can be profoundly healing in their way of reflecting back to you what you already deeply knew, but maybe you couldn't consciously conjure or express in words, but totally validating. And I think that validation and affirmation is incredibly healing and also sort of gives you permission to be who you already are, but in a way that is a little bit more empowering and unapologetic. So those are the places where I would start, because if you don't have those, it can be a bit challenging to move through some of the things that are quite scary and you don't have a full understanding around. Of course, I'm a huge fan and proponent of the Akashic Records as one way of tapping into the unseen realms, of connecting to information that is really supportive and being in a healing space. But there's so many wonderful modalities and practices and ways of an energetic healing that are just like limitless. And so whatever resonates with you, find something that ding, hits that chord and resonates with you and lean into it. And yes, you might, along the way, think to yourself, oh my God, I'm crazy. Oh my God, what are people going to think of me? Oh my goodness, how could I possibly do that? Who am I to do that? And I want you to have those and allow them to flow through your consciousness and then allow them to flow out and do the thing anyway. Because you have this beautiful life. You have this beautiful life. You have this beautiful body. Who are you going to be with that? How do you want to experience the world in your body and in your life? That's what it's ultimately about, right? There's so much more to say about this, but I don't want to keep going on and on past our hour. So I would love to hear from you. Does this episode strike a chord for you? What are some of the ahas or illuminations that you experienced listening in, tuning into yourself in this process? And what are your questions? I would love to know. Go over to wildlyrooted.com/podcast connect. I have all the links in the show notes as well, of course, so you can find that there and drop me a line. Literally, leave me a voice message, or you can write a little note. Alternatively, you can leave a rating and review and let me know. If you're on Apple Podcasts, then you can leave a review and share if this has been helpful for you and any ahas or insights. I would love to know. Stay tuned for next week when we're diving into this yummy winter solstice and another episode of Healers on the Mend with Megan Liebman, my beautiful co-host on that series, as well as a moon musing of this upcoming new moon in Capricorn on the 23rd. All right. I am sending you so much love during this time of slowing down. At least here, I'm feeling that in the Northern Hemisphere. And I'm excited to get to know those of you who choose to apply and step into our beautiful container that is the Wildly Intuitive Practitioner pathway. Until next time, be your wild, beautiful self.